Now, ahead of the Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit, the Ministry of Agriculture and the African Union Commission have noted that a holistic approach to the creation of new fertilizer policy and the inclusion of local and homegrown solutions will be key in the discussion of a new roadmap for soil health and fertilizer at the upcoming conference in Nairobi, Kenya. Now, speaking to the media, the PS for Agriculture, Kiprono Rono, and the African Union Commission for Agriculture urged stakeholders to focus on local solutions as a way to diversify from foreign fertilizer challenges.
The government experts on matters to do with soil, development partners, the civil society, and all other stakeholders in adopting regenerative practices, policies, and approaches that will improve the long-term value of land.
Ahead of the summit is the continent's largest fertilizer and soil health forum, as already mentioned by the PS of Kenya, Ministry of Agriculture of Kenya. So this is the largest event for this year to be held under the leadership of His Excellencies Dr. William Samoei Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, in co-sharing with His Excellency Mohamed Ould Sheikh El Ghazouani, the current President of the African Union Commission, and also the President of the Republic of Mauritania.
Of course, that conversation there being the precursor to the conference that's coming up. And our discussion here in the studio continues with John Macharia, Country Director, Agro Kenya. And we want to start off with a look at essentially the fact that for many decades, for a long time, not just Africans, but people across the world have had local solutions to their own challenges. The issue of soil acidification has become a big problem. And a lot of experts will tell you that it's because of the addition of things which, for example, fertilizer that has been made using as a byproduct of the petroleum production process and that kind of thing. What is the role of organic fertilizer and other homegrown solutions in this space, especially in the space of the policy roadmap that will be drawn up at the conference?
I think it's not an either-or conversation, because people tend to pit inorganic versus organic fertilizer. And what I mean by that is, if you select manure and you say you want to plant 1 hectare of land, will you have access to that amount of manure?
It's a challenge,
right? It will be a challenge. And therefore, in realization that that's a challenge, then there is space for inorganic fertilizers to be able to supplement what you cannot get in volume from the natural constraints we have. But like I said earlier, and I think like the PS said, there is room for practicing regenerative agriculture, which will basically keep your soil healthy. If you have intercropping, if you have crop rotation, that will allow your soils to actually regenerate. You'll grow your organic matter. You'll be able to improve your soil carbon. I think right now one of the things we're promoting is planting of agroforestry trees. We're also promoting planting of fruit trees that broadly supplement income from fruits. I mean, to provide income from fruits. But that is also providing a lot of forage that can actually go into mulching, and that is broadly improving soil health.
How then can we get the conference and then, of course, the financing conversation to start to swivel towards making the so-called local solutions more mainstream, supporting them in terms of broad-based uptake and support? I have in mind, for example, the creation of fertilizer using the soldier fly initiative, that sort of thing, because it seems like something that might just actually work if it was supported and expanded. How then do we get African governments in various spaces, not just in Kenya, to then start to focus on that kind of thing?
I think it's to also acknowledge that the government is actually trying and is actually creating the space for innovation. Because in Kenya, for example, I think we have three or four companies that are using black soldier fly as as not on one side it's providing animal
protein,
foods, but
yes.
on the other side it's actually providing frass,
yes.
which goes into our soils.
Yes.
So, and I think what everyone else now is trying to do is to coalesce their investment to see if this thing is able to grow. But again, we also have to bring in a little bit of science to actually test out that you're not actually increasing or you're not introducing zoonotic diseases from animals or from insects into people and back into the soil. So there's room to innovate, there's room to make models work, and there's room to actually convince financiers that these things are viable and they can actually be able to scale. And I believe I have seen the examples in Kenya being taken to Uganda, being taken to Tanzania, and people actually trying them out there.
Let's talk about intra-Africa trade and the fact that fertilizer poses one big arena that can then grow intra-African trade, seeing as a lot of our fertilizer today comes from as far as Russia, Ukraine, in some instances Cuba, some islands, those sorts of things. A lot of African countries are not really in the fertilizer production space. What do you think we need to do to grow our fertilizer production such that we start to achieve some measurement of local dependability on production, and of course diversify in a way that does not make us so vulnerable to things like the challenges created by COVID-19 and the war in the Ukraine?
So one thing to understand is that fertilizer, it comes from a substance, it comes from a rock, it comes from somewhere. And for example, Morocco has a little bit of raw material that can go into fertilizer. If you look at Tanzania, because of gas because of gas especially, I think they have some components, but not every other country will have them. So promoting inter-African trade is actually important for us to be able to have guaranteed or sustainable supply of certain minerals that we require. And I think during COVID we saw Morocco actually give Kenya a sizable amount, I think 16,000 metric tons of fertilizer to go into a subsidy program. So I think inter-African trade is important.
Then we earlier on talked about specific fertilizers for specific crops and the fact that a lot of different geographies across, not just Kenya, but across, will plant different things. For a lot of farmers, especially in the face of this subsidy, you get the feeling that they're getting one thing. How then do we start to make it broad-based such that anticipation of what people will need at a certain time is available, anticipation of what people should put in the soil is also available, so that then there's that coordination?
So even as you think about the Abuja Declaration and the things that have actually been progressive, the introduction of balanced or blended fertilizer is one of those things, in that you can actually find a fertilizer that is specific for potato. Or fertilizer that is specific for a region, right? That is one thing that is actually a success. The second thing is that, and we've seen this grow in Kenya, I think the blended fertilizer market probably has anywhere between 2 and 8% of total fertilizer that is coming to the country, and that has been growing year on year, and at some point we think that this is actually going to be a game changer. But I think I'm trying to remember your second question.
It was then, how do you then get this to the point where governments can anticipate that, for example, next year, because we've had rains, we're focusing on shorter crops, so that then this fertilizer will work rather than the one that we give them for maize, which takes 8 months?
And that's a good question. I think AGRA has run a program that it was called Fertilizer Optimization. We actually helped develop a fertilizer optimization tool that could actually tell you, based on your soil tests, what would be the right formulations for the fertilizer to have. But we worked together with the government, and I think that's how the blended fertilizers were actually allowed to sell into the market. So it is providing space for, again, innovation, but again, people know DAP as a brand. They struggle with other names. NCAN, they know them as a brand, and urea, right? And not necessarily, John Mashari as a brand of fertilizer. So
consumer education. Now, you've brought us to a very interesting discussion, especially when we talked about listening to your soil, the aspect of soil testing. And for me, a conversation that needs to be talked about much more, because many farmers are not testing their soil. Of course, the numbers are picking up, But it used to be really difficult, really expensive to test your soil, and it seems that technology has changed all this. Please talk about that.
Yes, indeed. I am encouraged that farmers are actually testing. I know of companies that actually require you as part of a contract to actually test your soil because they have traceability requirements to the export market.
Yes. Why is it important to test your soil in the first place?
It's important to test your soil in the same way that it is important for a human being to test whether they are healthy. A human being depends on vitamins, fats, proteins, carbohydrates. A plant depends on zinc, iron, nitrogen, etc., etc. We get them from food.
Yes.
The plants get them from the soil.
Yes.
So one of the issues you're talking about, soil leaching and mining, is a situation where you have continuously put a formulation of fertilizer without understanding exactly what the plant is extracting, right? So you're putting perhaps the wrong thing, whereas the plant is asking you for something different. So you need to test your soils, and you need to know you're testing for which crop, so that you know what is lacking in the soil, so that you're able to replenish that soil with exactly what the plant will extract. So soil testing does help in that particular way, in that you can actually be very specific about this fertilizer that you want. And this is where it becomes interesting, because if you think about it that way, and then you think that people actually have crop-specific fertilizer, that's how you're beginning to see impressive growths in yields.
Can you then test for other things apart from fertilizer? For example, soil diversity, where...
Yes, I mean, a soil test has almost 16, 17 different bits of information, things like your moisture content, your organic matter, the test for the amount of nitrogen, the amount of zinc, iron, ammonia, whatever.
Let's talk about the national aspect, the international aspects. And I'm reminded of 2007, 2008, 2006, and the green revolution in Malawi, and the fact that we were then able to get fertilizer through agrovets and agro dealers to the ground, and farmers had this huge surplus of maize. But in the midst of a corruption crisis, and then a clampdown, and what we call them, essentially aid stoppage. And in the next years, the production went to nearly zero. We got the feeling that that particular maize was addicted to fertilizer. So then, is it necessary to continue having fertilizer? Can we say that we are at the point where we've managed our soil so well that we don't need to put in any fertilizer? Or even, does that question make sense in the first place?
Because you asked it, I have to answer.
Yes.
But I don't think there is such a thing as addicted to fertilizer. Because a plant grows once, then it withers and dies, and then another one grows. So, but the case here I would make is that we need to be judicious users of fertilizer to ensure that we are not harming the environment. So that means we need to use it in the right way, at the right time, for the right crop, for the right agroecology, so that we do not have adverse environmental impacts.
Let's talk about the conference itself and what to expect. So what do you think should be the highlights that we look out for, and what would be the outtakes?
I think for me, number one, which is impressive, is that we have more than 2,500 registered delegates who are going to be coming. We have close to 60 side events that have been planned. We have quite a number of ministers of agriculture and heads of state that are coming. So the first thing I expect is that we have unity of purpose and mind around the Nairobi Declaration and the targets therein. And particularly for me, what I'm looking for is government actually broadening up space for private sector to be able to play a bigger role in terms of fertilizer access for smallholder farmers. I think there's a role for science to actually inform us more about our soils. I mean, the science is saying that, we only have 50 years of viable soil. So there is a big conversation about what really should we need to do so that we're bequeathing our children with a resource that will actually help them, grow food at that particular point in time. But there's also the financing angle. I think banks are awash with money. Smallholder farmers need credit to be able to access inputs, and that linkage would be good if government was to create the space that allows for financial institutions to also play a role in financing the fertilizer sector in Kenya and Africa in general.
So one of the questions that the PS was asked in the morning, and I don't want you to answer that, but just to put it out there, is the fact that does the Kenya government have the moral authority to host such a conference in the face of the crisis that we've had? And for me, I want to rephrase that and ask, how do we continue to gain and retain this, the trust of the farmers that we work with, so that they then know that if government is giving us something, this is what we need, there's research that's gone into it, the formulation is correct, and that the output will be what we require. Essentially, because if you don't gain their trust, then uptake will be really questionable and you'll be moving backwards. As a strategist, as a person who speaks into this sort of policy, what would you advise me?
I think my position has been that, first of all, I congratulate the Kenyan government because of taking leadership.
Yes.
And I think it's taken leadership in quite a number of very challenging topics.
Yes.
And it's showing leadership for the whole of Africa. It wasn't easy to put together the climate summit, and I think that was done.
Yes.
And fertilizer and climate are basically yin and yang, right? So having the fertilizer summit in Kenya is for me a big plus, that we are beginning to talk about the difficult issues around whether it's organic or inorganic. We are talking about the environmental impact of either.
Yes.
But we're able to bring together heads of states, ministers of agriculture, and actually set roadmaps that then are defining what the future of Africa would be. So the presence of leadership doesn't mean that there are things that probably didn't go right.
Yes.
But you don't start from your back foot. You actually lead from the front. You lead from what you actually want to do, where you want to go, that is actually going to solve for the whole of Africa. So for me, I have commended them on taking the step to actually host it. And believe you me, it's not been easy. The journey to start this conference started 2 years ago.
Wow.
And there are quite a number of countries that were proposed and that they were not willing to take leadership. So for me, having this government take this leadership is a big plus.
Very well put, sir. Now, just two things before we go. First off, youth innovation and the topic of soil health and fertilizer. The fact that across the entire agriculture value chain, when we talk about things like fertilizer and soil health, there presents many different opportunities for youth to make a living, to find jobs and that sort of thing. When we talk about farming, people think about the hoe and getting into the ground, but there's so many different opportunities along the value chain. Please speak into this and how that then the youth can start to take up these opportunities.
If there's one thing I would want to be known for as a country director for Agra, is actually cracking the nut on youth in agriculture. Why? Because the average age of farmers in Kenya is anywhere between 55, 75 years old.
Yes.
If you think about 10 years, 20, 30 from now, and ask the question who will be feeding us, certainly it's not that cadre of farmers. But yet the median age of Kenyans, which is 22 years old, are actually not in the farm. And we are trying to work with the Ministry of Youth, Ministry of Agriculture to actually develop flagship initiatives that would begin to provide a case for the youth to come into agriculture. In the little work that we're doing, we are seeing the youth coming in and providing extension services, and that is basically bridging the gap between technology and farmers, research and farmers for that matter. We are seeing the youth coming up and aggregating 100 farmers of your neighbors and actually asking, do you want fertilizer? Which one do you want? Can I go get it for you? Then you make a margin. And we are seeing quite a bit of that going round. On average, we are seeing youth making anywhere between $100 and $150 a month. And if you think about this is someone in Nyahururu, Nyandarua, where there's actually no work, if you're able to trade on behalf of your neighbors, it's quite a bit of money. And we're looking at ways we can be able to scale that. And indeed, fertilizer is one of the conversations, seeds, manure has come up, a little of poultry and things like this. And all these are important because they're giving youth jobs in agriculture.
Finally, let's talk about the issue of biodiversity and circular agriculture. We talked about fertilizer application. What's the impact this has on flora, fauna in its ecosystem, things like bees, bacteria, the small things? And when you talk about rejuvenative agriculture with fertilizer, how then does that complete that equation such that you say you're managing your soil for the future, but in ways which do not remove you from the modern aspect of fertilizer application?
Yeah, and then again, that's why I said it's about judicious use, and it's about knowing where and when you should actually use it and how you should use it. And we have seen, for example, farmers who are taking up microdosing, and also practicing regenerative agriculture. We are seeing, earthworms coming up. We're seeing improving of organic matter and things like that. And I think there's need for more awareness. And I think that is also what we try and tell governments. So it's not just a subsidy because you're giving fertilizer. You need to follow that up or have good agronomic trainings before you actually give input, so that people actually know the practice, the measures that they should use in actually using some of these inputs.
Okay. Indeed, thank you very much for your time, sir. We are at the end of our conversation, but something quite interesting and informative, and definitely looking forward to the conference, and of course speaking your mind of what the conversation will be and what the outputs and outtakes of that will be. Asante sana.
Thank you very much.
Well, that conversation there brings us to the end of Business Today for today. Of course, we'll see you again at 9 p.m. for KTN Prime Business, but to of course remind you that the conversation continues here on KTN News. We'll, of course, be at that conference to bring you the latest of what will be happening there. But from us here in studio, it's do continue to enjoy the rest of your viewing. My name is Peter Akaba, and kwaheri ya kuonana.